Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started just because I know we have a lot to cover. I am excited to welcome back Jason. He is the Director of Outreach for NCSBN, and he has worked with us in the past to help train our NCLEX trainers who have offered a variety of different trainings in the past as we prepared for this new exam. And we really hit the ground running on NCLEX preparedness from last year up until the exam was released. And we are just excited to get an update from him so that way schools have the opportunity to ask questions, hear feedback from him, hear updates and things like that. So I'm not going to take too much time, but I just wanted to welcome Jason back and provide him with the opportunity to just give us some much needed updates as the exam has taken place. So I'll hand it over to you, Jason, and thank you again.
Well, thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Wynn, as well, for having me. And thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm going to go ahead and put up some slides so we can get right into the material. I've planned a lot of time for Q&A, so definitely get those questions ready. And once I'm through with this, we'll jump into the chat for that. Or if it's a small enough group, maybe we'll just talk to each other. So I'm calling this one Next Generation NCLEX. What's new? What's next? I think many of you already have what I'll call my initial package of information related to the exam. I am going to recap some of it here, but mostly I wanted to give you some new insights, some new information. The exam's been in the field for 7 months, for example, so we've learned some things. I always start with the disclaimer. If you've heard me before, I like to call this, if you see something, share something. Those of you that are here probably have colleagues, students, grads that could use some of this information. Feel free to share it, and I'm happy for you to get a copy of this slide deck. The only exception is commercial use. We have an email address at the bottom there, and you just have to check with us for permission on that. Okay, so what do I got? Well, what's new and what's next, just like the title said, but I do like to start with what's old. So I'm going to do that, but I'll try to go quicker than I usually do. So I want to give a quick recap on some things that you may already know. And looking back, right, sometimes in hindsight, we can see more clearly what we've done. So next generation NCLEX highlights, expanded focus on clinical judgment. That's a biggie. Things you've heard about, things you've maybe seen by now, case studies, some new item types, changes to the test design. In other words, how long the test is, for example, what kind of items are on it and how many, and partial credit scoring. We're going to dig in a lot deeper today on that topic, by the way. Now, I want to give you a new way to look at this exact same list. All right, watch carefully. It's going to change. There it is. Same stuff, but sometimes, right, when there's a lot of stuff, we lose track of what's really important. So the expanded focus on clinical judgment was really the what. That was really what the changes were all about. We needed to expand the focus on clinical judgment, but we weren't going to be able to do that if we left everything else about the test the exact same as it was before. So all of these other things really were the tools that got us there. They were the how, right? So what at first looked like a list of 5 random things, I like to reframe this way as really the main thing plus the tools we needed to get there. In other words, if we weren't looking to expand our focus on clinical judgment, we wouldn't have needed these other things. There was no motivation back in 2011, 2012, when we were getting started to say, wow, we really wish we had new item types. No, not really, right? New item types is more work for us, more work for you, more work for everybody. But if we need them today to get a clinical judgment, well, then we need them. All right. Anyways, I want to add one more word to this, which is the why, and I'm going to give you kind of a shortened version, but if you haven't heard it before, it's important to me that you know it. So there were a few things that really got us looking at clinical judgment in particular and the possibility of making a fairly significant update to the exam, but literature review in 2012 certainly captured a lot of it. What did we find out? Well, those of you that were educators back in 2012 can nod your heads. Education, educators, faculty already knew how important clinical judgment was. The only thing they weren't sure about was whether it was on the NCLEX, but you knew that it was critical for something even more important, namely real life as a nurse. So what did we see in practice around that time? Half of new nurses were making errors. 2/3 of those errors weren't about not knowing what something was, right? The kind of thing you might get right or wrong on a multiple choice question. 2/3 of those errors connected to judgment and decision making. And only 20% of employers were satisfied with their new nurses, our new grads, in other words. Now, really key statement I saved for last, clinical judgment, even at the entry level, is critical to patient safety and public protection. So that was definitely a finding of our research, and that's probably something many of you can nod your heads with, where you might not have had to do our research to already know that. Now, why does that matter for the exam? Well, the exam is looking at the entry level, first year of nursing, and the mission of NCSBN is public protection. Therefore, if we have something critical to protecting the public, and it's critical even in that first year, we have an obligation to test it as long as we can do so in a fair and valid manner. Now, some things are harder to test than others. Clinical judgment, it turned out, was really hard to figure out how to test, right? But if we could figure it out, then we needed to do it. So that just gives you a little bit of the why. There's more. I've got longer versions, right, where I go into a few other things, but I'll call that the main highlight. So again, we're still in the old before we get to the new. Measuring clinical judgment, our first big breakthrough was this measurement model. It looks a little busy at first, but I'll just highlight that there are 6 boxes that I think are really where to put the focus. Essentially, it was a divide and conquer approach that we took in measuring clinical judgment. We were going to measure, as far as the exam was concerned, 6 component skills that added up to the whole thing. You can see them here: recognize cues, analyze cues, prioritize hypotheses, generate solutions, take actions, and evaluate outcomes. Those 6 skills add up to the whole thing. As long as we can find a way to test those, we're in good shape. And then for faculty, it's important to me that you know what these things mean. Because as we look at them, it's easy to look at them and say, well, that's NCSBN jargon, or this is testing terminology, right? But every clinical judgment question that we added to the exam tests one of these 6 boxes. So they are really important. They're not just terminology. These are the basis of all the new questions on the test. So with that, I'm going to walk you through a case study. I'm going to actually jog you through a case study because we'll go faster than usual because, again, I've got new stuff I want to get to. But this is kind of my personal mission, if that's okay. I never, ever want to present on this exam to educators and have them leave not really seeing the connections between that clinical judgment measurement model and the questions on the test. That's super important to me. And so I try to squeeze that in anywhere I go, even if I think people have already heard it before, because sometimes getting it a second or third time really reinforces the learning. So sample case study. By now, you probably know what the screen looks like. It's got a lot of parts. Where I put the bright number 1, that's just you are here. This is a case study. Here's how far along you are. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We call that our real world nursing scenario. We'll take a closer look soon. And then where I put the number 7, that's the first item in the case study. There are going to be 6 different items in all. And you may remember from that measurement model, 6 boxes. Well, each of the 6 items targets one of the 6 boxes, and they do so in the exact order that they were listed in the model. So we'll see that. We'll see examples. Okay, so we'll go pretty quickly through this. In fact, I won't read the whole thing like I often do because my focus here is really just making some connections. So main thing to know in this particular case, well, the scenario starts out with a lot of information that we categorize under the history and physical tab, but that's not all. There's more. We give more in the nurse's notes tab. We give some vital signs, and we give some lab results. I will pause here and say, in case you didn't already know this from before, that one of the changes we made April 1st as part of the next generation NCLEX launch is that whenever we present a numerical lab value, we will also provide the reference range. So you can see that here right on the screen. However, I want you to know it's not just in the case studies, or it's not just this example, it's the entire test. Even a multiple choice question, if there's a numerical lab value, we will provide the reference range. So what's the takeaway from all the stuff I just showed? It's a lot of information, right? If you're an experienced nurse or an experienced educator, you're okay with a lot of information. In fact, you kind of probably took it all in 5 seconds and you're already ready to do what's next, right? But for your grads, for new nurses, a lot of information can be overwhelming. It can even be paralyzing. So as we start off the case study, the first question always involves, out of all this information, being able to figure out what stuff actually matters the most right now, right? Because maybe it's all important, but you can't react to 80 different things at once. What matters most right now? So I mentioned those 6 boxes. The first was called recognize cues. That's the technical name, but essentially what it comes down to is what matters most right now. So if we go back to the item, this case study starts off by asking which of the following assessment findings require immediate follow-up, select all that apply. But fundamentally, what does that mean? Well, it means which of these things that you just read matters the most right now. So what I find is it's good to know the model, it's good to know our 6 boxes, but sometimes it's handy, whether you're working with students or just really trying to think about it on your own, right? That a good way to summarize and simplify what we call recognized cues is what matters most right now. And then that's how every case study begins. First question in every case study, right? We might use different words. We've got a few different item types, but fundamentally, this is what we're asking. So what I've learned from folks like you as I go on my world tour of NCLEX is you don't just want your grads to know what matters, but you want them to know why. And that's what we do essentially with the second item in every case study. So for example, here, which of the following potential issues is the client at risk for developing? And we've got a bunch of choices. Well, why did those things matter so much, right? Those things that matter the most right now, those cues we recognized as really important to pay attention to. Well, they mattered because this person might have some pretty serious things right around the corner. So in our model, second question always addresses what we've named analyze cues. But again, if you want a simplified way to think about it, it's really why. Why were those things so important, right? Why do we need to pay attention to those things? Third question in every case study. Well, let's look at this one. Pay careful attention because this can go 2 different ways, okay? It can go 2 completely different ways. I shouldn't say completely different, but 2 pretty different ways. So here the nurse is initiating the client's plan of care. Complete the following sentence. Okay, the nurse should first address, and we've got some stuff, abdominal pain, respiratory status, lab test results, followed by, and we're going to have those same choices again. We can see here prioritization. That's super clear. We're prioritizing. Now, what are we prioritizing? If I had to describe it, right? I apologize, this is going to come off clunky, but if I had to describe it, I'd say we're prioritizing some aspect of the client's status. Now, if we go to our measurement model, we call this prioritize hypotheses. So remember I said we can go in 2 directions. Let's go back to the item. We don't see any explicit hypotheses, I don't think, right? There might be some underlying hypotheses or implicit hypotheses, but we're not staring at a hypothesis here, I don't think. So point is, I said we can code 2 different ways. This question is prioritizing, but it's probably prioritizing some aspect of the client status. That's a little clunky to fit in one of my tiny boxes. Now, we also, instead, third question in the case study could live up to the name a little bit more, and you might see a question that says, the client is most likely experiencing X as evidenced by Y and Z. In other words, what's the most likely hypothesis here? So I want to emphasize here when it comes to the third question in the case study, we name it prioritize hypotheses. It's important for you to know that we can address it 2 different ways that I nickname what's going on or where do I start? And those are really 2 fundamentally different questions, but the point is either one of them can come up as the third question in the case study. So if you're keeping score at home, we've looked at the first 3 out of 6 questions. We're at halftime. And I like to pause and say that the first 3 questions in the case study are like the nurse as a detective. What do I mean by that? Well, think about how a detective might operate. There's a lot of clues, and the detective is trying to figure out which ones are the most important and what they mean and why and where to start or what might be going on. Well, that's the same thing that the nurse is doing in the first half of our case study, but instead of clues, the nurse has cues, right? Practically the same thing. Second half of the case study, which is right where we're about to go, is very much more action oriented, and we'll see that. Fourth question in the case study. We can take a quick look at this. The nurse is speaking with the physician regarding the treatment plan for the client who was just diagnosed with a splenic laceration and left-sided hemothorax. I know a lot of grads tend to skip the directions, so they might miss the diagnoses here, but at any rate, for each potential order, click to specify whether it's anticipated or contraindicated, right? Will it help the client? Could it hurt the client? Okay, so we've got this nice list. In our measurement model, the fourth question is always, we call it generate solutions, but I give it a nickname, right? If we want to simplify, fundamentally, what could help? Okay, and that's every case study. Fourth question, what could help? If we were to back up just a little bit here, you'll notice that this isn't just what could help because it's got that other column. Well, what kinds of stuff wouldn't help, right? Kind of the flip side, or what kinds of stuff could hurt. So when I give my little nicknames, I know I'm simplifying a little bit, but that's really the focus. What kinds of things could help? Will we do all of them? No, not necessarily, right? Maybe we have a client experiencing pain. Well, we might give them pain medication. We might coach them with breathing exercises. We might reposition them, right? We might have a few tools in our tool belt, and we might pick the best one for the situation, or maybe 2 out of 3 or 2 out of 4, something like that. So I want to emphasize when we talk about generate solutions, what kinds of things can help, it doesn't mean we're going to do all of them. It's kind of brainstorming. It's the way I think about it. Now, when we get to the fifth question, all of a sudden we are talking about things we're really going to do. From a nursing process perspective, we're advancing from planning to implementation. We're going from our brainstorming list to our to-do list, is the way I think about it as well. So let's take a look at this one here. The nurse has been asked to prepare the client for immediate surgery. Which of the following actions should the nurse take? And this time, everything we check off is something that the nurse really will do, right? We call that in our model. Fifth question is always take action or take actions. I'm guilty of having both in my PowerPoint. So even after all these years, but at any rate, how do we think about that? Well, what do I do? Or sometimes, how do I do it? Now, I put these two questions here. If we were to go back to this, somebody might say, yeah, this is a what do I do? Because I'm going to check off all the things I'm going to do. Somebody else might say, oh, I think it's a how, because it's how am I going to prepare the client for surgery? Well, either way. So because of that, I like to give you both. What do I do or how do I do it? We close out the case study with the sixth question. Click to highlight the findings below that would indicate the client's not progressing as expected. And you can click on a word and a sentence lights up, and you can change your mind by clicking again and do all these things. But at any rate, we are ultimately in the evaluation phase here, and we call this in our model evaluate outcomes. It has a lot to do with figuring out the things that got better. Maybe some things got worse. Maybe some things stayed the same. As always, I've got a friendly nickname. How'd it go? So I've walked you through the case study, and what I've tried to focus on, less than the content, less than the item types, is really trying to make real those 6 boxes. When I said every new question, right, every clinical judgment question on the exam hits one of those 6 boxes, I really meant it. And so I was trying to really showcase that here as we looked at each question, focusing on what are we really testing with respect to the clinical judgment measurement model? Well, those 6 boxes in that exact same order. So to summarize, because I know we want to get to the new stuff, to summarize the old stuff, we have in every case study a real world nursing scenario. By the way, I hope all of you come to Chicago and participate in item writing for the actual exam, your case studies onto the actual exam. But our instructions to you are give us real world, right? Don't try to make it too easy or anything like that, right? Real world for entry level nurses. If a first year nurse would find themselves in this situation and be expected to have some success, it's fair game for the test, right? Okay. Anyways, real world nursing scenario, 6 items. Each one has a clinical judgment focus. And in fact, the focus in order is recognize cues, analyze cues, prioritize hypotheses, generate solutions, take actions, and evaluate outcomes. We know that. But I'm going to say it a different way now because, right, this is something I learned talking to so many audiences over the last several years is initially when I would present the clinical judgment measurement model in the case study, what I would hear from people is, Jason, do you know how much we already have to do? Do you know how much we're already doing to get our students to learn X, Y, and Z? Do we really need 6 new complicated things we've never heard of? Right? I might be exaggerating a little, but you get the idea, right? It's like, oh, great, more stuff. So the point I like to make is that in fact, what we've done here is we've taken 6 things that you've always cared about, right? And you've always known were important for the success of your grads, things that you always focused on, right? You wanted your new grads as new nurses to be able to walk into real life situations, not NCLEX items, real life, real world nursing situations, and be able to answer questions like what matters most right now and why, what's going on, where do I start, what could help, what do I do, how do I do it, and how'd it go, right? These are the fundamental, like, keys to success, right? For new nurses and maybe even experienced ones as well, right? Point being, we haven't invented 6 new things that you got to try to figure out and worry about. What I'd say we did is we've taken 6 of the most important things you already cared about, and we've just made sure that they're on the test. So, right, as you're covering what really matters with your students, and somebody says, but is this going to be on the NCLEX? Now you get to say yes. All right, couple of little notes, but I don't like to leave the case study without these. I usually show an example from the hospital, but your case study can be anywhere there's a first-year nurse, right? It could be some kind of community health fair. It could be a school nurse's office, anywhere there's a first-year nurse. My example tends to be a med surg example, but you could have anything out of the test plan. If it can be in a multiple choice NCLEX item, it can make it into a case study. You could have a pediatric client. You could have a client experiencing mental health issues, for example, from what we call our O4 category, psychosocial integrity. You could have both in the same case study, right? A pediatric client experiencing mental health issues. If it's in the test plan, it can be in the case study. So that's the case study. And again, I don't like to waste any opportunity in front of educators where I leave and people don't know how the clinical judgment measurement model and those 6 boxes in particular connect to the exam. I think of these as your decoder ring to the case study and to all of the clinical judgment on the exam. So I hope I covered it well and gave you an opportunity to make some connections or reinforce some connections you already had. Now we've got a brief, really brief infomercial, which is the NCLEX depends on you, right? You've got a QR code, you've got a website you can go to, you fill out a form, and you get on our list. It doesn't mean we'll bring you to Chicago next week, right? We've got a lot of people already in there, but we'd love to have you on our list. And when the time comes, you'll get your call. And if you can make it, we would love to bring you, right? I will confess, right? When I took the job, my background, right, is math. That's what I studied in school, and testing, right? That's what I've done for 26 years. When I came into nursing 13 years ago at the NCLEX, I guess if you'd asked me back then, is nursing nursing? I'd say, yeah, sure, right? And so I might think that it wouldn't matter too much who comes and writes these items as long as they're good at it, right? But I would say I've learned, right? I've gotten a little smarter as I go. I think it does matter, right? Because our test plan lays out what's eligible content, but it doesn't say too much about the context, right? And I think for the exam to represent diverse contexts and diverse community experiences for nurses, it's important to have diverse item writing. So I would love to see folks from this audience today consider joining us. Anyways, what's new? All right, that's why you're here. What's new? Is there anything new? Yes, results. In fact, we just released updated pass rate results, like just in about a week ago. So this was the prediction I got from a lot of people, right? Especially as we got further into COVID, right? People were like, oh my God, Jason, I like some of what you're doing with the next generation NCLEX and clinical judgment, but does it have to be now? Have you seen our pass rates lately? They've fallen off a cliff. Are we heading for a train wreck? Well, the good news is this. The good news is that this prediction did not come to bear. So, what a relief, I think, to everybody, myself included. All righty. Um, I was always an optimist going in, but anyways, it was good to see the real data. So let me start with RN, the RN exam. We at NCSBN focus primarily on what we call this category, first time US educated. What does that mean? If somebody's already failed the test and they take it again, we're not going to count their pass fail result in this category. They're definitely on the list, right? We're definitely counting them, for instance, in the bottom row under all candidates, right? But this particular category I've highlighted is first timers only and US educated for US licensure only. So if somebody went to school, let's pretend in the Philippines, and they applied for licensure in New York, we wouldn't count them because that's not US educated. There's a new, I guess, instance that didn't exist back in the day, but now that Canadians use the NCLEX RN for licensure, I'll also exclude from this category somebody who, let's say, is educated in Colorado, but applies for licensure in British Columbia, Canada. Okay, so although it doesn't say it here, this is total first-time U.S. educated U.S. licensure applicant. So anyways, small print out of the way, what did we find? Well, the April, May, June test takers, the very first quarter of next generation NCLEX, passed at a 94% rate. A year ago, the April quarter from 2022 was 82%, right? We kind of fell off that cliff with COVID. And at least if we look at the numbers here, we appear to have made it all the way back and possibly, and then some, I could even say. So a 12% gain over a year ago. Now, very, very recently, so recently, most people have not seen this. You're my first audience to get this. 91% is the most recent quarter. So the July, August, September test takers, we just published this result. It's on our website, 91%. So what I'm going to give you is something that you probably haven't seen, which is some context for these numbers. So April and July. April's green here. July is blue. Something you maybe had heard or thought or speculated was that April, May, June test takers tend to do a little better than July, August, September. In general, I'll say it's true that when somebody graduates, if they test fairly quickly, that group tends to do better than the folks that wait a long time to test, right? Now, there's some self-selection going on in that because, of course, if you graduate and you feel really confident and ready, you do want to take your test right away. If you graduate and you're feeling pretty iffy, you're probably going to want to carve out a lot of time to study. Now, whether or not you study, I don't know, but it also carves out some time to forget things too. So there's a little rust that kicks in for the July, August, September. So what this graph I think illustrates really nicely is literally every single year since the start of my graph in 2007. So it's a lot of data here. Every single year, the July quarter is always a little bit below green. And it's such a perfect pattern that the truth is, once we got that 94 for April, and people were like, Jason, what do you think July will be? I said, well, probably 90 or 91. Now, I didn't have any inside information. I just knew about this pattern. So it's pretty easy to guess July from April. So just for fun, I'm going to show you what the other quarters look like. In fact, brace yourself for the October, November, December test takers. They maybe wait a little too long to test. So October, November, December test takers, we call that our October quarter. Well, traditionally, that is the worst quarter as far as pass rates go. And you can see that that's been true so far every single year. So if somebody says, Jason, what's your prediction for this upcoming October, November, December cohort? Well, you might not love my answer, but it might be like, 84-ish or something like that. In other words, I would expect quite a drop from 91. And it doesn't mean all of a sudden somebody did something wrong or the exam broke, right? We've got a historical trend here. These are probably our least confident test takers following graduation. I'll show you January. It's a little messier. It's somewhere kind of, it's pretty good, but it's sort of a mix. And it may be here that you've got some people that really put off taking their test from a May or June graduation combined with some December grads with a lot of confidence. So it's a little messier, but the point is not too bad. So let's go to the NCLEX PN. Same thing here, first time US educated is our focus. The April quarter was terrific, 90%, and that also was up 12% from the year before. This most recent quarter that we just published, 91% if we round off. Again, I'll give you that historical context. And this time, interestingly, it's reversed. Most of the time, not always, there's a little bit of crisscross, okay? A little bit of crisscross going to make you jump. But generally, we see that the July quarter is better than the April quarter for the PN exam. So interesting. And we saw that that was the case here as well for 2023, although it was rather close. October, well, as we saw with RN, October traditionally is the lowest pass rate. Again, a little bit of crisscross. It's not a totally clean pattern like for RN, but in general, I would expect some drop when we're talking about October. And then the January quarter, kind of like before, a little bit of a mix, okay? But pretty good, right? There was a year 2011, I think maybe 2020 as well, where it was the best one, right? So pretty good when we're talking about the January quarter. So anyways, okay, so I've given you a little bit of context. I'm going to give you a little more information, and I wish I had way more. I really do. I wish I had way more here, but I'm going to give you a little more. Breakdowns by school, right? Breakdowns by a specific program. So NCSBN does not publish that data. If you go to our website and you're like, oh, how'd my school do? You're not going to find it. Some boards of nursing, because we essentially provide every board with a portal where they can pull these results. Some boards pull and publish the results. Other boards do not publish the school by school breakdown. So I'm just going to share from Virginia. Virginia does. So I'll show, for example, Hampton University. I'm not giving away any secrets because I'm just going with public information off the internet. But do these gains that we saw apply across the board? Well, I can't say for every school, but if we look at Hampton, for example, their April quarter here, there was only one test taker, but the person passed, so that's nice. How about the July, August, September? Well, there were 10 test takers, 9 of them passed. We can put that all together for a 91% pass rate. So Hampton, I'll say, more or less tracked with our national average. I pulled another HBCU, Norfolk State. And here, same thing. Well, for the April quarter, only 2 people tested, 1 passed, 1 didn't. So, okay, not a big number to work off of. For the most recent quarter, 9 out of 10. So put it all together, 10 out of 12, 83% pass rate, not bad at all. So point is, some states make these available on their website. Because we just pushed out the July, August, September data. If you go to your state and it's not there, you might check again later because not everybody's gotten around to it. I noticed Virginia's out already. A few other states are out already. There are a few other states where if I log in today, they're still on the April quarter. They haven't yet updated. And then, like I said, there are some states that simply don't put out the information. What I can say, talking to a lot of faculty, is most schools have at least one person who knows how everybody's done, right? And so if you're curious about your school and you don't know, I bet there's a colleague. All righty. With that, I've got just a little bit more I want to share on data, and then I've got yet another topic that's important to me to cover. So average test length, well, it's been out for 7 months. What I'm going to show you here is something that the needle could still move a little bit as we go. But at any rate, how many questions does the typical person get? Well, let's start with what the extremes are here. With the computer adaptive testing that we do, the shortest possible test is 70 questions that count, and then we always have 15 that don't. So that's the 85 in parentheses, okay? So 70 questions that count, but if you throw in the ones that don't count, 85. That's the shortest possible NCLEX. On the maximum, 135 that count, plus 15 that don't, so 150. All right. Well, as it turns out, the average exam over the last 7 months has been right in the middle, literally, like exactly in the middle. 102 questions that count, or 117 if you like. So literally right in the middle between minimum and maximum. Now, it's not an even distribution because a lot of people get the minimum length test. If we can figure out right away if they pass or fail, quite a few people get the maximum length test as well, right? But if we average everybody, we literally end up right in the middle. And if you think about the test being 5 hours, 300 minutes, this equates to just under 3 minutes per item that the typical test taker has if they want to stay the entire time. PN, watch closely because it doesn't change much. Here it comes. There it is. It was 102 for RN. It's 101 for PN, right? And again, the needle could still move. This is 7 months of data. Maybe after 12 months, we'll see something a little bit different. But the point is, what's the average? Well, it's right about in the middle between minimum and maximum. Okay. With that, I'm going to give you one of the questions I got the most before launch. And almost always what would happen is I would get asked when I had about 30 seconds left, and it was probably a minimum 5-minute answer that was needed to do it justice. So I'm going to give you this here because we do have the time. I built it in. So I'm calling this a what's new. And it's really what's new in terms of your learning and your information about the exam. I don't want you to think this is something we changed yesterday on the NCLEX. This is all part of that April 1st launch, but it's something that in general, I would say most faculty don't know or understand to the level that you're going to get it. So you heard about partial credit scoring. How does it work? Well, let me review it with a quick example. This was from the case study I shared. Let's pretend somebody checks off the first 5 boxes. 3 of them are right, 2 of them are wrong. For a select all that apply item, we use a scoring model called plus minus to assign partial credit. You get a point for each of the green stars and you lose a point for each of the red bars. And so in this case, you'd get 1 point, right? Well, that's not very many, but in the old days of the NCLEX, you'd get 0, right? Any error would turn it into a 0. With partial credit, this person gets 1 point. Had they have left off pulmonary embolism, if they didn't check off that wrong answer, they'd be looking at 3 minus 1 equals 2, right? But at any rate, plus minus scoring. So just a reminder that partial credit scoring allows you to get various numbers of points on different questions. Now, what people really want to know from me, but like I said, I can't do it in 30 seconds. They want to know, how does it really work? Jason, if there's a 3-point question, does that mean it's worth 3 times as much? Are the partial credit items now easier than multiple choice because you can get part credit? And a common question I get, Jason, let's say there's a 5-point question. How many points would you need to pass, right? Is 3 out of 5 considered good? Or would you need maybe 4 out of 5, right? Let's hope not 5 out of 5. But anyway, all right. So I get a lot of questions like that. And so I want to try to give you information that'll help you understand how all this works. Here's the first thing you need to know, though. First thing you need to know is CAT is completely different from normal tests, right? The kinds of tests I took as a student, the kinds of tests you probably create for students, well, those are normal tests. Computer adaptive testing is a very different animal. I have a video, a 7-minute video on NCLEX.com where I explain computer adaptive testing. It's the world's only CAT video, not to go viral on TikTok. But at any rate, if you're looking for a solid understanding of computer adaptive testing, kind of a friendly tour, you can go there. Not now, but I'll just show some highlights. So computer adaptive testing, totally different from a normal test. Let's remind ourselves how a normal test works. Well, this is very familiar territory. You get points as you go, right? You answer a question right. Cool, you're going to get a point. Okay. At the end, maybe there were 20 questions and you got 15 points. Okay, that's cool. Now, in a typical test, an easy question and a hard question are probably worth the same. In other words, if you have 2 students who each got 15 out of 20, they probably got the same grade or the same score. You weren't sitting there thinking, wait, hold on, which 15 did this person get versus this person? Now, all the questions are pretty much worth the same. Easy or hard doesn't matter. And then at the end of the typical test, you say, how many points did this person get? And you can compare that to what you needed to pass, right? If you got 15 out of 20 and you needed 70% or 14 points to pass, you passed the test. It's pretty simple, right? This has been a successful way of testing for a really long time. It's just not how CAT works. With computer adaptive testing, each of these bullets has kind of a counterpart that's pretty different. With computer adaptive testing, we're not really adding up points. What we're doing is we're constantly re-estimating something that we call examinee ability, right? We're constantly trying to figure out how much does this person know, but we don't figure it out by counting up their points. We do figure it out by looking at which questions they get right and which questions they get wrong. And easy and hard questions operate very differently. Somebody who gets a lot of hard questions right gives us confidence that their ability is very high. Meanwhile, somebody who only gets easy questions right, well, we may think their ability then is quite a bit lower. So easy and hard questions work very differently. It's not about the points, it's about which questions you get right versus the ones you miss. And then at the very end, right, when we've done our final ability estimate, we then compare it to what we call the passing standard, sort of like the passing score. And if you're above it, you pass. And if you're below it, you fail. So very different from a normal test. I'm going to show some examples with multiple choice. And then that sets the table for you to understand how it works with the partial credit scoring as well. So let's start with multiple choice. Let's pretend that the test kicks off. By the way, my little dashed red line, we'll pretend is the passing standard, right? You got to be above that, to the right of that, to pass the NCLEX. Left side of the graph is where I'm going to keep the easy items. Right side of the graph, I keep the harder items. And we associate harder items, people who get those right, with high ability candidates, candidates who really know a ton. And we associate the very easy items with the lower ability candidates or the examinees who don't know enough, let's say. So we kick off the test, something like this. Now let's pretend the person gets it wrong. The way that CAT works is we go find an easier item for them. Well, let's say they get that one wrong. We go find an even easier item. Let's say they get that one wrong. You can predict what's going to happen next. We're going to go find an easier item, and good news. Oh no, bad news. They got it wrong. Okay, shoot. I thought we were going to get that one right. Okay, how about this one? Ah, there we go. There it is. Okay, well, now that they got that right, we're going to go look for a harder item. And they got that right. So we're going to look for a harder item again. And they got it wrong. And then we'll look for an easier item. And they get that right. You need sound effects. So now we'll look for a harder item and they got that right. And we'll look for an even harder item and they get that right. I'm going to pause there and I'll just point out that this person got 5 out of 10 questions right. But our goal here isn't to come up with a score like 5. Our goal here is to estimate ability. Based on these 10 questions, of course, the actual NCLEX is way more than 10 questions, but based on these 10 questions, we might think this person's ability is around where I put the head or the brain here, right? If we give them questions harder than where I put that, they probably get them wrong. If I give them questions easier than that, they probably get them right. So their ability estimate is somewhere there. If this was the entire NCLEX, they would fail the exam. They're below the passing standard. Now, remember, they got 5 out of 10, but we would call that a fail. Let's take a look at somebody else's test. They start here and they get it right. We'll go a little faster now. Get it right, get a harder item, get it wrong, get an easier item, get it wrong, get an easier item, get it right, harder item, get it wrong, easier item, get it right. And then we'll wrap this up. Did I get to 5 of each? Yeah. This person got 5 out of 10, right? Same score, 5 out of 10. But if we're estimating their ability, it's now probably somewhere around here. So this person passes. Same score, 5 out of 10. So in CAT, again, we don't really care what the score is or how many questions somebody got right. We're just focused on ability estimate. And so it comes down to which questions did they get right and wrong. Okay? So that's the model if I'm looking at multiple choice items, or I could even say any item that scored right or wrong only. Okay, this is sort of before partial credit, how CAT worked on the NCLEX. So if we think about partial credit, all right, and I do get this question a lot, and it's hard to answer in 30 seconds. If we think about, for instance, the select all that apply item on today's NCLEX, what we don't want to do is say, oh, okay, maybe it's like one of those dots when Jason shows the multiple choice, because it's not that simple. What it really becomes is, let's pretend that it's a question where you can earn up to 4 points. Each point has its own difficulty level. So that's kind of the new exciting different thing that happens when we use partial credit scoring in the computer adaptive testing framework, is each score point has its own difficulty level. So remember, one of those questions I asked before is about how well would you have to do on a 4-point question to pass the NCLEX? Well, if this were the entire exam, you'd probably need to get a 3 to be above the passing standard. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit more about how this works and how this gives us more information than just an ordinary multiple choice question, because in fact, if you earn a 3, you're also demonstrating to us that you knew how to get 1 point and 2 points, and you're demonstrating to us that you didn't quite know enough to get 4 points. So I'm simplifying a little bit. If there were psychometricians standing behind me, they might shake their head a little and be like, well, it's not quite that simple. I am simplifying a little to make it understandable, but in a way, you can think of a 4-point question on the exam as giving us roughly the same information as if it were 4 individual questions, each with their own difficulty level, right? So it's a very efficient way for us to test. We get a lot of information. We sort of get 4 items worth of information in one question. I'll just show a couple other examples. Here's one where 2 out of 4 would be passing, right? If you were kind of borderline and you got 2 out of 4 on this, it would bump your ability estimate upward over the passing standard. And of course, by getting 2 out of 4 here, it's also kind of like you'd get the 1 out of 4, but you'd also show us that you didn't yet have the ability or knowledge for the 3 or 4 point. Finally, because some of our partial credit items are worth a lot of points, right? And somebody might say, my gosh, if it's worth 8 points, is that better? Like, is it easier to pass? Is it fair that somebody can get one worth 8 points and somebody else gets one that's only worth 3? Isn't it an advantage to get, an 8-point question? Is that going to help your score more? Well, no, not really, right? It just means that there's 8 different difficulty levels associated. And in this case, right, maybe you get a 3, right? If some other person got a 3 out of 3 on theirs, well, that's super good. If you get a 3 out of 8, that's not as good necessarily, right? It might knock you below the passing standard. And again, I'll draw my same picture. If you get a 3, it's sort of like we're getting 8 items worth of information in one. Okay, so if this is the first time you've seen or thought about this, right, this may be one to kind of go back through the slides again, or feel free to ask me questions about it. But in general, what are the main things to know? How does partial credit scoring work on the actual NCLEX, on a computer adaptive test? Well, you have to remember, it's all about ability estimates. So before partial credit, every item had a single difficulty, 1 dot on the graph. Now you get 1 dot for each score point. So you might have 8 dots on the graph, right? Each corresponding to a different ability level, corresponding to the different number of score points. And what that gives us is more precise ability estimates. When you think about it, right, in the old days, if you gave somebody select all that apply and they made one little mistake, they get a 0. You gave somebody else select all that apply and they got the whole thing wrong. They chose the wrong thing every single time. Well, they got the same score. Well, you know that their knowledge is different from one another, right? The person that just barely missed probably knew quite a bit more than the person who got none of them, right? But in the old days, they would get the same score. Now they no longer do, right? And so that's the idea. We're able to take all of these candidates that were sort of clumped into the same gigantic category, and we're able to kind of tease out these differences now. So it's all about more precise ability estimates. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I know that that's about as complicated as I ever get, is trying to explain partial credit scoring within the CAT framework. Okay, what's next? Some of you have seen this picture I share a lot, where I talk about the old NCLEX. We call it classic now, where we talk about the old NCLEX as a cheese pizza. And the question was, what's the next generation NCLEX going to look like? Is it going to look like a hamburger, spaghetti? Is it totally different? And the answer, right, after a dramatic pause was no, it's just a cheese pizza with toppings, the toppings being the clinical judgment, case studies, what have you, right? So fundamentally, everything you cared about before with the old NCLEX, we still care about, right? All the knowledge people used to need to have, right, to pass the NCLEX, they still need to know those things, but now they also have to know some of the toppings. Okay, so I'm going to keep this metaphor as we talk about what's next. Good news is, in terms of the kinds of changes to the exam that might impact the stuff you feel like you need to teach or your students need to learn, the good news is there is nothing right around the corner. And if you think about these pepperonis here, they took us 11 years, right? Meaning if today we said, hey, we have a great idea for the NCLEX, right? It might be 11 years before it happened. So right around the corner, I don't think you need to worry too much or be excited too much about something big and new and different coming. However, the delivery of the exam is something that we've been looking at carefully. I was kind of our point person during the pandemic. This was not a fun job. It was important, but it was not fun. I was the point person during the pandemic of trying to get graduates to test safely in the testing centers when conditions were a little extreme, right? You might have a testing center normally with 15 desks that would only take 5 people, right? So there were some bottlenecks. It was rough. One of the things a lot of programs went to during the pandemic was online or remote proctored testing. That was something that we chose not to do because it would have involved security compromises to the exam. This is a super high stakes exam, and it is an exam with life death consequences for patients. So we can't really let our guard down with security. We weren't ready to jump into remote, even though it would have solved a lot of problems for us in 2020 and early 2021. But in the background, we were looking at ways that security of online testing or remote proctor testing could be enhanced to essentially put it on par with test center exams. At our annual meeting this past August, our CEO, Phil Dickinson, shared some of the research that we've been doing. And this is something that I think will probably happen. I don't want to say it's right around the corner, right? And definitely when we have solid information to share, we will put out good quality information in advance, like we tried to do with the next generation NCLEX launch. But if you're looking for the next big change to the exam, it won't so much be to the content, it will be to how it's delivered, that we would expand our delivery options so that potentially some test takers could stay home and test rather than travel to the testing center. So I don't quite want to say coming soon, right? But that's probably what would be next. So with that, if you're like, how can I be the first person to know when you're doing that? This is probably the most underutilized thing we have at NCSBN. It is our mailing list, and it's really good. We don't spam you. We don't sell your information to anybody. If you search NCSBN subscribe on the web, you go to this page, you check off only the things you care about. Maybe next generation NCLEX is the thing you check off. Or maybe you care about the nurse licensure compact and you scroll down and you check that off. I love In Focus magazine, so I would check that off for me. But anyway, point is, you check off the things you care about, and as soon as we have new information, we email it to you. So you'd literally be the first person to get it, right? The moment it goes up on our website, you've got the email with the link or whatever with the information. So I would encourage you to do that. I always love faculty to know things a little before their students and grads, maybe even a lot before. So take advantage of that. With that, I've left some time for Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the slides. I'm going to type my email into the chat as well in case you don't want to jot it down super fast. But definitely, even after this presentation, all of you should feel very welcome to reach out to me if you ever have any questions at all about the test or even anything we're doing at NCSBN overall. And I can either do my best to answer or route you to the correct person. So, okay, I see a question already from Wynn. That's an informative graphic. I think she's probably talking about my graph of the test takers by quarter. Are the test takers in each quarter not mutually exclusive? I assume not. Yeah, that's you are correct when uh, all the dots on all my graphs are mutually exclusive because I'm focused only on first time test takers,
Oh, on
right?
first time. Okay, so
Yeah,
they are
so
mutually
all my
exclusive.
pass rates, all my graphs are first
Okay,
timers. So
okay,
if somebody potentially could test each of the four quarters, but it's only their first instance that would make my graph.
okay.
Yeah.
Do you track overall also?
Oh, we sure do. Yeah. So I grabbed all this data from what we call our pass rate sheets on our website. And the ones on our website have, columns all the way to the end. So once you
Okay,
hit, it gives you the year to date or the overall
okay.
for the year. So yeah, we put all that out there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? And it's not a huge crowd. If you want to come off mute and talk, you can do that or just type in the chat. Either way. Don't be shy. I always try hard to leave out really important information, just to keep the Q&A lively,
Mr. Shorts, this is
Sure.
off topic, but I'm curious to know what the number 42 on your lapel pin is significant for.
Oh, okay. I'll take it. Yeah. So I had a chance in April to visit the Jackie Robinson Museum in Lower Manhattan. Jackie's number was 42, retired by Major League Baseball. So I always try to wear a fun pin every time I do something like
That's
this. So thanks
awesome.
for asking.
My son's baseball number has been 42 since he was 4. He's 13 now, and so anytime I see the number 42, it always stands out to me.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, now you have to hope he never makes the big leagues or he'll have to give his number.
Right. But thank you for your presentation. It was very informative.
Oh, sure thing. Sure thing. I appreciate it. Other questions? I had a math professor once. He said, I call this a complete course. Anything I don't cover in class, I make sure I put on the test. And then keep in mind you can ask me obviously about anything I've covered, but you can also ask me about things I didn't cover, right? It's always a challenge as I prepare. I try to come up with what do I think folks would want to know, and you always have to leave some things out as you put new things in. So let me ask you this, and it's okay to be camera shy, but for those of you on the call, because I mentioned, I bump into faculty that seem to know how their school's doing, or they know somebody who knows somebody. In general, do y'all know how folks have done? Have they done pretty well? Yeah, okay, okay, good deal.
Yeah,
I
Jason, I have a
Yeah,
question.
sure, Carrie.
And I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this, but I guess I can just share a struggle. Well, so our pass rates, we have an accelerated and traditional BSN cohorts, and it's 100%. So I'm happy to
Oh,
say
gee,
that.
hard to beat that.
Um, yeah, so I'm not real sure uh, what might have been the turning point for them, but I'm very happy to see that. But I guess now the struggle is just how do we layer in and help students understand how to approach these next gen type questions, and what's best practice, I guess, for faculty to start to introduce that into our program and introduce students to those questions.
Well, Carrie, if you're the one with 100%, I should be asking you. So my short easy answer is do whatever you've been doing, I guess. Yeah, so one of the things, I've got a few mantras when I present on this. One of my things I like to say is the what is more important than the how. And so what I mean by that, because I have so many schools that say to me, Jason, we can't make pull down menu items, we can't make highlighting items. How are we supposed to get ready? And I say, worry about the what, not the how. In other words, if the point of the question is understanding what matters most right now, there are all kinds of ways you can talk about that with your students, right? I mean, if you can create select all that apply, well, that's a good way to do it. Or if you just put some stuff up on the screen and people raise their hands and call things out, I mean, that kind of works too, I suppose. It's a little less formal. But the I would love to think that all test takers have had at least this much exposure to each item type before they go and take the real thing. And they can do that because we publish, or Pearson VUE publishes a tutorial that walks them through each item type, right? Now, if they've seen each item type for this much in their whole life, I think they're ready for the item type. However, what I need them to see when it comes to recognize cues, analyze cues, et cetera, I need them to see this much, right? So focusing on these questions like what matters most right now and why, right? Asking why in general, I think is always a winner, right? Having people really think about why are we doing these things, right? What would happen if we did this instead? What made you decide this was better than this, right? So really kind of overlaying critical thinking on top of the nursing content knowledge, right? So if they can answer questions like what matters most and why, what might be going on here, what kinds of things can help, how do you do those things, and if they see the results, how did it go? It's kind of interpreting or evaluating what happened. If they're good at that, that's the most important thing. That's 99.9% of it. But I would also encourage them, if you don't have it yourself already at your school, because most schools don't, send them to the Pearson VUE tutorial. So when they take the NCLEX, it won't be the very, very, very first time that they've ever been asked to click to highlight something, right? Let's get that out of the way in the tutorial. Does that help?
That's very helpful. Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. What else? All right, y'all. I'm looking at the clock, and some of you probably have things you need to go to. So let me just once again give you my email. If anything ever comes up where I can be helpful, I'm here for you. I don't want to quite say 24/7, but pretty close. So anyways, with that, I'll say goodbye. Jazz and Wynn, thank you so much for having me. Everybody, best of luck to all of you, and thank you for the really, really important work that you do.
Thank you so
Jason.
much, Jason.
Sorry,
bye-bye.
Jasmine. Yes,
Good.
thank you. As always, thank you so much, Jason.